Hi, folks. Welcome back. Today, we're going to be talking about a topic that seems to be never ending, and it's never ending because every single day there is a new development. Every day is something else. Another story, another revelation, another policy proposal, another thing that comes out that makes you stop and say, what the hell is going on? And in today's case, it's this. See, Congress is quietly moving to integrate the American and Israeli militaries. Now, this was covered in an article by Ben Freeman that was published yesterday. And honestly, it's one of the most insane things I've seen in a long time. In the article, Ben outlines how, in what he describes as a first step toward moving aid to Israel even further into the shadows, the 2027 NDAA would all but fuse the two countries' armed forces together. Now, remember, this comes just weeks after Congressman Max Miller proposed extending veteran benefits to people who served in the Israeli forces, the IDF. At the time, a lot of people, including myself, when we covered this story, said, well, that's crazy. That's never going to happen. And now here we are, a few weeks later, looking at a proposal that would dramatically deepen military integration between the United States and Israel. Now, let's get into the details, because according to Ben Freeman, buried inside the House's 2027 NDAA is Section 224, the United States-Israel Defense Technology Cooperation Initiative. And what it would do is move military cooperation well beyond the current aid model. We're talking about bilateral research and development, weapons, co-production, and deep defense technology integration. The bill specifically mentions artificial intelligence, quantum computing, autonomous systems, directed energy, cyber capabilities, biotechnology, and much, much more. In other words, the battlefields of the future. Now, we all know there's an arms race happening right now when it comes to AI. We discussed this a few days ago when we looked at the Pope's encyclical. Every major power on earth understands that whoever wins that race is going to have a tremendous advantage going forward in all sorts of ways. So when you start talking about integrating defense technologies in these areas, this isn't just some minor thing. This isn't just another aid package. This is something much. That for a second, folks. Network integration and data fusion with Israel. Put simply, the United States military data could become Israeli military data. Israeli military data could become United States military data. That's not normal defense cooperation, by the way. That's not just, hey, we're allies, we're buddies. That's something much deeper. And I think most Americans would have concerns about that sort of deal, especially when so many people already believe that Israel has an outsized amount of influence inside the United States. Whether you're talking about lobbying, media influence, financial influence, or political influence, this is already a conversation that exists and only heats up in the country. So when people hear that the United States and Israel may be moving toward deeper military integration, they're naturally going to ask questions. Now, Ben goes on to point out why all of this matters. He talks about traditional military aid is at least visible. You know where the money is going. You can debate it. You can hold your Congress people accountable because they vote on it. People can argue about it. But when you start moving the relationship into joint defense acquisition, co-production, research partnerships, and technology integration, now you're pushing the relationship further into the shadows. You're pushing them into contracts that bureaucrats put together and you don't get to vote on or approve or even know it's happening. Now, Ben points out that if Israeli defense firms start opening more co-production facilities inside the United States, they can turn around and say, look, we're creating jobs in your district, Mr. Congressman. How about you just support more of our interests? Think about that for a second, folks. Now, all of a sudden, it's not just about foreign aid anymore. Now, there's a congressman whose district benefits from the Israeli facility. There's a senator whose state benefits from that facility. There's local economic pressure to maintain and expand those relationships with Israel. That's how influence works. That's how the military-industrial complex works. And according to Friedman, we already have examples of this in places like Mississippi and Arkansas. Section 224 would essentially turbocharge that model and make Israeli defense interests even more embedded in American politics. Now, here's the part that really stands out to me. As we've discussed on the show, and as Ben points out, all of this is happening at a time when Americans are becoming increasingly skeptical of unconditional support for the state of Israel. A recent poll found that only 16% of Americans support continuing to provide weapons to Israel without any new restrictions. Think about that disconnect for a second, folks. The public is becoming more skeptical. The public is asking more questions about this relationship with Israel. The public wants more accountability when it comes to the state of Israel and our relationship and us sending tax dollars to them. And meanwhile, Congress appears to be moving toward deeper integration, and people notice that. People see that, and they ask why. Now, obviously, this discussion doesn't exist in a vacuum. Israel is currently involved in military operations that have generated enormous controversy around the world, like their genocide in Gaza, like the ethnic cleansing that they helped perpetuate in Artsakh by their proxy Azerbaijan, like the indiscriminate bombing that they're doing in southern Lebanon in primarily Christian communities. Even the United Nations has described some of Israel's bombing campaigns as indiscriminate. Human rights organizations, journalists, and critics of the Israeli government have repeatedly accused Netanyahu's government of committing war crimes. We've heard inflammatory rhetoric from members of the Israeli government, including Ben-Gvir. We've looked at these statements here. They're literally treating Palestinians like subhuman scum and trying to wipe them from the earth. So much so that we've even looked at comments and testimony coming out of the Knesset that many people find absolutely horrifying. Yes, people even advocating as rape becoming part of the Israeli military policy in one of their bodies of government. Unbelievable. And yet, despite all of that, it often feels like Israel is treated differently than any other country on earth because it gets almost unconditional diplomatic, military, and financial support from the United States. And it truly is a double standard because if Russia were doing the same kind of war crimes that Israel is doing and then begging for this sort of integration, people would be losing their minds. If China were doing the same thing, people would be losing their minds. There would be nonstop coverage. There would be hearings. There would be investigations. There would be demands for transparency. But when it comes to Israel, the conversation for some reason is completely different. And that's part of why so many folks believe Israel has an extraordinary amount of influence inside the American political and media system. Now, back to the article itself, Ben's argument is that this isn't really democracy at work. This is the military-industrial complex doing what it does best, expanding relationships, expanding budgets, expanding influence, and doing it in ways that most people never hear about until it's already happening. And frankly, the timing couldn't be worse. As Ben notes, Israel has repeatedly used U.S. supplied weapons in Gaza in ways that human rights organizations and journalists have linked to violations of international humanitarian law. Whether you agree with those accusations or not, they exist. They're widespread. And they're part of the reason public skepticism is growing. And that's why so many Americans are asking questions and will continue to ask questions. It's our duty as Americans to keep asking these questions because partly funding this crap. Why are we moving deeper into integration with Israel right now? Why is this happening now? Why isn't there a larger public debate about this? Why is this being hidden in the NDAA? Because look, folks, these aren't just small issues. We're funding these operations. We're providing the missiles to carry them out, not just in Gaza, as I mentioned, not just in southern Lebanon, as I mentioned, but elsewhere in the region too. Many folks have pointed out that we're funding ethnic cleansings in the region. We've also seen figures like Randy Fine, the Israel First Andy Fine, push for policies involving arms sales to Azerbaijan, which Israel has also supported. Azerbaijan itself has been accused by many observers of carrying out ethnic cleansing in Artsakh. These are all connected issues because they raise broader questions about American foreign policy, about whose interests are being prioritized, and about how much influence foreign governments should have over American decision-making. And look, at the end of the day, what concerns people, including myself, is the lack of transparency. It's the lack of consent. Most Americans didn't vote for this. Most Americans weren't asked about this when they were voting. Most Americans probably don't even know this is being proposed. Yet, we're talking about potentially integrating portions of American military and Israeli military in ways that go far beyond what most Americans would consider to be an alliance. And yes, a lot of people look at the current Israeli government and view it as genocidal. A lot of people look at what's happening in Gaza and believe the word genocide applies. In fact, let me expand on that one, because if you actually listen to the rhetoric coming from certain Israeli officials, you think the word genocide is actually putting it mildly. Whether people agree with those views or not, those views are becoming more common, not less, in the state of Israel and within their leaderships. And Americans are noticing. So when Congress starts talking about deeper military integration with Israel, people are going to ask questions because they should. And frankly, they're right to ask questions because this isn't some minor policy tweak buried in a bill. This is a major development, and it's one that deserves a lot more scrutiny than it's currently getting, because I don't think there's a single red-blooded American out there that would like to be funding a genocide being perpetuated by another country. And in case you think I'm exaggerating or that any of what I said is inaccurate, well, just today we got reports that Israel is dropping bombs on Beaufort Castle, one of southern Lebanon's most historic landmarks. This is a 900-year-old site with UNESCO's highest protection status under the Hague Convention. Folk, the king of Jerusalem, built this castle for the Crusaders. It is a baronial-style fortress that is over 1,000 years old. It was captured by Saladin in 1190, but roughly 60 years later, the Crusaders reclaimed it. It's a reminder of the battles that Christians had to fight in order to stabilize the Holy Land. Now, all that being said, we are also getting reports that Israel is dropping white phosphorus bombs on civilian areas in the village of Arnon in southern Lebanon. And to note this carefully, folks, these are internationally banned munitions. White phosphorus is a highly reactive chemical that spontaneously ignites upon contact with oxygen, generating intense heat, dense smoke, and toxic fumes. While it is legally used by militaries to create smoke screens and illuminate targets, using it in or near populated civilian areas is strictly prohibited under Protocol 3 of the Convention on Conventional Weapons. Now, the reason it's banned in civilian areas is because white phosphorus can cause devastating burns. It creates burning fragments that stick to skin and clothing, burning deep into tissue and even bone, and can often reignite. All in all, it causes indiscriminate harm. Its intense, uncontrollable fires and toxic, suffocating smoke make it an indiscriminate weapon that poses a lethal threat to civilians. Now, for anybody who's been paying attention, this isn't surprising. This sort of indiscriminate action in civilian areas is what Israel has been doing for the last few years. In fact, claims of Israel using white phosphorus in southern Lebanon go back as far as 2023, when the Israeli army fired artillery shells containing white phosphorus along Lebanon's southern border between October 10th and October 16th. Which brings us back to our original question. Do we truly want to integrate with this hostile genocidal force that's using illegal weapons to basically ethnically cleanse different areas in Lebanon and Gaza and throughout the Middle East? Do we truly want to further integrate with Israel? Do we want taxpayer money funding these sorts of genocidal actions? You know, yesterday I did a debate, and it was an interesting debate, and this was one of the issues that came up. I think this is one of those issues, in fact, that the left and the right can often agree on. However, foreign influence in who America chooses to support in military conflict is something that's of concern to most Americans, because we don't want to be funding any sort of deadly action abroad, right? Especially when it doesn't truly directly benefit Americans. Now, there are segments of the right, and I don't want to lean into financial conspiracies and say that people are being paid to have these sorts of opinions, but it is truly strange to me when people choose to have certain opinions about funding genocidal and terroristic forces such as the IDF to the teeth and giving them basically a blank slate diplomatically in order to do whatever the hell they want in that region because of strategic partnerships we may have with the state of Israel or whatever other moral obligation that is politically created around engaging in conflicts on behalf of this state. In that vein, October 7th is often brought up as a justification for these sorts of military actions, and I think it's important to say that one horrific act does not justify another. I think we have to, as conservatives, and I know there's a big conservative split on this issue, this Israel issue, as Republicans and as conservatives, we have to keep our eye on the ball and understand that there are certain actions being perpetuated by some of our allies that are so deeply immoral that we will someday have to answer for the decisions we made financially, militarily, and diplomatically that enabled them. Whether we answer for it now in the court of law or whether we answer for it before God, justice always comes. It may take time, but it always comes. Anyway, folks, you tell me what you think in the comments down below. Hope you have a terrific day. Peace.